I didn't fall apart. I didn't call him back. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that Tim Hortons on Dundas Street, and I let the engine run for a long time, watching the snow come down on the windshield. And I thought, 63 years old, and this is where I am. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I built something. For 31 years I built it. A small bookkeeping and tax preparation business. Nothing glamorous, just me, and eventually 2 part-time staff working out of a little office on the main floor of a converted Victorian house in Hamilton, Ontario. I started it when my son was 2 years old, and his father and I had just decided, quietly and without much drama, that we were better off apart. I didn't have a plan. I had a bookkeeping certificate from Mohawk College, a second-hand desk, and a son who needed to eat. I called it Whitmore Financial Services. Whitmore is my mother's maiden name. She passed when I was 31, just before I opened the doors, and I named it after her the way you name things after people you miss. Not because it's strategic, but because you need to carry them with you somehow. My son's name is Elliot. He was a good boy. I want to say that first because it matters. He was a good boy who became, somewhere in his late 20s, a man I didn't always recognize. I don't blame him entirely. I don't think I'm supposed to say that, but I believe it. The choices were his. The path he walked was his. But I had a hand in shaping the soil he grew in, and some of that soil was too soft in the wrong places. I gave him too much. I knew it even while I was doing it. When he was 24 and wanted to travel Europe for 3 months instead of finishing his business degree at McMaster, I said yes and paid for the flights. When he came back and decided he wanted to finish the degree after all, I paid for the remaining 2 years. When he graduated and moved into a rental downtown and said the first and last deposit was tight, I wrote a check without him having to ask twice. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he'd find his footing. Parents always tell themselves that. He did find his footing, eventually. He got a job as a project coordinator at a mid-size construction firm. Nothing extraordinary but steady, with benefits and a pension. He was good at it. He had my father's way with people, easy and warm, and his colleagues liked him. For a few years, it felt like things had settled. I stopped holding my breath. Then he met Rochelle. I want to be careful about how I talk about her because I've spent a long time examining my own feelings, and some of what I felt in those early days was probably just the ordinary jealousy of a mother watching her son choose someone else first. That's real, and I own it. But some of it was something else. Something I noticed in small ways before I could articulate it. The first time I had them both over for dinner, a Sunday roast, the kind I'd made my whole adult life, the kind Elliot used to ask for on his birthday. She sat at my kitchen table and looked around the way you look around when you're appraising something. Not admiring, appraising. She commented that the house was cozy. In the tone that means small, she asked how long I'd owned it. And when I said 22 years, she said, "Oh, so you bought it when prices were reasonable," which is the kind of thing people say when they want you to know they think you got lucky rather than earned something. I let it go. I told myself she was nervous. People say strange things when they're nervous. Elliot proposed 8 months later. She said yes at Niagara-on-the-Lake, in the middle of an ice wine tasting. And he called me from the parking lot afterward, so happy he could barely speak. I said all the right things because I meant them. I was happy for him. I was. They got married the following October. Small wedding, 40 guests, a venue in Ancaster that she chose, and that cost more than I thought was wise, but Elliot was making decent money by then, and it wasn't my decision to make. I wore a dress I bought at a boutique on Locke Street, and I danced with my son to a song his grandmother used to play on the radio, and I cried the good kind of tears. That day was good. I want to be honest about that too. The trouble started slowly, the way trouble usually does, not with a single moment you can point to and say, there. It was a gradual shifting, like the ground changing under a house over years, until one day you look at the foundation and something has cracked. About 14 months after the wedding, Elliot came to me and said he and Rochelle were thinking about starting a business together, an events planning company. She had experience in hospitality. He had the project management background. It made sense on paper. He was excited in the way he'd been excited about Europe, about McMaster, about Rochelle herself, fully committed, a little breathless, already 3 steps ahead of the practical questions. He asked if I would consider transferring partial ownership of Whitmore Financial to him, not a buyout, a transfer, as a gift. His reasoning was that he could use it as collateral for a small business loan while they got the events company started. He promised the financial services side would keep running exactly as it was. He had no intention of changing anything there. It would just be on paper. I said I needed to think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I called my accountant, a woman I've trusted for 15 years, and she told me very plainly that what I was describing was a significant legal and financial risk. I called my friend Deb, who has known Elliot since he was in diapers, and she told me to follow my gut. My gut was uncertain. But Elliot was my son, and the business had always been something I imagined passing to him someday anyway. I talked myself into it the way you talk yourself into things when you love someone and they're asking. I transferred 49% ownership to him. I kept 51. I was careful about that. I made sure the controlling interest stayed with me. I had a lawyer draw up an agreement that specified any major decisions about the business required my approval. I felt like I had protected myself adequately. I had not. The first year was fine. The events company launched, struggled a little in the early months, the way new businesses do, then started to find traction as Rochelle's hospitality contacts came through. Elliot was busy, distracted, but happy. He called less. He came to Sunday dinners less. I told myself it was a season. New business, new marriage, lots of demands. I didn't push. The problems started becoming visible in the second year. Small things first. Elliot mentioned that they were having some cash flow issues with the events company and that he temporarily used some of the Whitmore account to cover a supplier invoice. He said it like it was nothing, a minor administrative thing he was mentioning in passing. I asked how much. He said $4,000. I asked when he planned to replace it. He said soon. Soon took 3 months and a direct conversation that left us both tense. Then it was $6,000. Then it was a vendor invoice he'd signed in Whitmore's name without asking me. Then it was Rochelle calling me, not Elliot, Rochelle, to explain that they'd had an opportunity to expand into corporate event production and they needed the Whitmore brand to anchor a pitch deck, just temporarily, just for optics, and she'd already started on the materials. I said no. Clearly and directly, I said no. She was quiet for a moment on the phone, and then she said in a voice that was almost pleasant, I think Elliot was right that this arrangement would be easier if the ownership structure was a little more straightforward. I asked her what she meant. She said they'd been speaking with a business lawyer and there might be some options to explore. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. That was October. The following February is when everything broke. Elliot came to the office on a Tuesday afternoon. I was meeting with a client, an older gentleman who's been with me for 12 years, doing his annual tax return. My assistant knocked and said Elliot was here and needed to speak with me. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, and there was my son, in his coat, with his shoulders tight, the way they get when he's rehearsed something and doesn't want to deviate. He said that he and Rochelle had spoken with a lawyer, and they believed the original transfer agreement had some ambiguities. He said they felt, in the interest of clarity, that it would make sense to revisit the ownership split. He said Rochelle had identified a private investor who was interested in Whitmore Financial and that the investor's participation would require a majority stake. I looked at my son for a long moment. I said, "Elliot, are you standing in my office telling me you want to sell my business?" He said it wasn't that simple, that there were options, that everyone's interests could be. I said his name once, just his name. And he stopped. He said Rochelle thought it was the most practical solution given their current financial situation. I asked him what their current financial situation was. He looked at the floor. And then he told me. The events company was in serious debt. Not a little debt. Significant debt. Over $80,000. Some of it to suppliers, some of it to a private lender they'd approached 6 months ago without telling me. The lender was pressing. They had 30 days. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more clear than anger. I asked him why he hadn't come to me 6 months ago when this started. He said Rochelle thought they could handle it. I said Rochelle thought. He looked up at me then, and there was something in his face. Not remorse. Not quite, but the beginning of understanding that something had gone wrong. Not with the business. With us. With what we'd become to each other. I said I needed a few days, and I asked him to leave. He left. And I went back into my office and I finished Gerald's tax return. And I made him a cup of tea and I walked him to the door. And then I sat down at my desk and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding. The next morning, I called my lawyer, the one who had drawn up the original agreement. Her name is not important, but she is excellent. And she had advised me back then to include a clause I'd almost taken out because it felt like I was anticipating a fight and I didn't want to start the relationship with Elliot on that footing. The clause stated that in the event of any attempt to transfer, sell, or restructure Whitmore Financial without the written consent of the majority shareholder, me, the minority ownership would revert automatically to the original owner. Elliot had not replaced the money he'd taken from the Whitmore account. He had signed contracts in Whitmore's name without my approval. He had initiated discussions with a potential investor without my consent. He had, in legal terms, violated the agreement 3 separate times. My lawyer was quiet when I finished laying it out. Then she said, "Gloria, you have grounds. My name is Gloria Whitmore, after my mother." I told her I wanted to proceed. It took 6 weeks. It was not pleasant. Elliot called several times, and some of those calls were difficult because he was not always angry. Sometimes he was just confused, genuinely confused, like someone who would walk down a road without looking at where they were going and suddenly found themselves somewhere they didn't expect. Rochelle called twice. The second call I did not answer. The legal process revoked Elliot's 49%. It was returned to me in full. The Whitmore name, the client accounts, the building lease, all of it came back under my sole ownership. Elliot and Rochelle's access to the business accounts was frozen. The private lender they borrowed from without telling me, that was their problem to solve, not mine. I did not enjoy it. I want to be clear about that. There was no satisfaction, not the kind you might expect. What I felt was something closer to grief. Like finally letting go of a door handle you've been gripping for so long your hand has gone numb. My son was furious. Furious in the way people are when they know, underneath the anger, that they're the one who made the choices that got them here. He said I had betrayed him. He said I had chosen a business over my own child. He said things I won't repeat because I don't think repeating them serves anyone. I didn't respond in kind. I said, "Elliot, I didn't take anything from you. You had nothing to take. It was always mine." He didn't speak to me for 7 months. Deb checked in on me every week during those 7 months. She'd come over on Friday evenings, and we'd sit in my kitchen, and she'd make me eat something proper, and we'd watch British crime dramas until we were too tired to keep our eyes open. She didn't push me to call him. She didn't tell me what to do. She just showed up. I don't think people understand how much that means, the ones who just show up. My 2 part-time staff, I should mention them. One of them, a woman in her 50s named Patrice, who has worked with me for 9 years, who knew Elliot as a young man, came to me the week after everything finalized and said, quietly over coffee, that she was glad the business was still standing. I thanked her. She said, "You built this, Gloria. Nobody gave it to you." I think about that sentence often. The events company filed for creditor protection 8 months after the ownership dispute was resolved. Rochelle's private investor backed out. Most of the supplier debt was restructured. I don't know all the details because it was no longer my business to know. Elliot called me on a Wednesday in November. It was cold, a sharp early winter that had come fast, and I was driving home from a late client meeting. He left a voicemail. He said he didn't expect me to call back right away. He said he'd been talking to someone, a therapist, for about 4 months. He said he understood some things now that he hadn't before. He said he was sorry. Not for a list of specific things, just sorry. The way you're sorry when you finally sat down long enough to see the full shape of what you did. I listened to that voicemail 3 times in the parking lot of the grocery store on Upper James. I called him back the next day. We have been rebuilding for a year and a half now. It is slow. It is not the relationship we had before, but I've stopped wanting that one back. I want the honest one. The one where we both see each other clearly. That's the one worth building. Whitmore Financial is still standing. This year we had the best tax season in 11 years. Patrice got a raise. I hired a part-time associate who is 26 and very sharp, and who reminds me a little of who I was at that age, certain about everything, fast on her feet, not yet knowing what she doesn't know. I like her very much. There is one thing I have told Elliot, clearly and without softness, because I think the time for softness in that particular area has passed. The business is not his inheritance. It will go to a charitable trust when I retire. I made that decision 2 days after the legal process completed, and I have not changed my mind. He knows this. He said he understood. Whether he truly understands or whether he has simply learned to accept it, I can't be sure. But he said it, and I'm letting it stand. I am 64 years old. I wake up in the mornings in a house I have owned for 23 years, and I make strong coffee, and I watch the light come up over the back garden, and I think about my mother, and I think about what she built in her own life with fewer tools and harder conditions than I ever faced. She used to say, "The only thing you truly give a child is the example of how to live. You hope they take it. You cannot make them." I didn't cry when Elliot left that Tuesday. I didn't beg when Rochelle called. I sat with what I had built and I held on to it. And when it was over, I was still here. That's the whole of it.